This is too good not to share. Today, I get to sit down with a neuroscientist and talk all things breath work and yoga and meditation. And I'm delighted to be here with Martha. But before we go any further, my name is Salimah, yoga therapist. And if you found this channel, it's because healing and Kundalini yoga and consciousness is really important to you. And I wanted to broaden that conversation by bringing in some science, bringing in some expertise that isn't necessarily Kundalini, but is definitely of the neuroscience. So I'm super excited to have you here, Martha. I came across your work on YouTube because I was prepping for one of my Kundalini yoga training program modules, and I found your work on breath. And I loved how you explained everything. I loved how you took a global approach to meditation traditions, breathwork traditions. And there was just something about you. So I got in touch, and here we are.
Yeah, thank you
Yay.
so much. I'm so happy to be here, and I love what you're putting out into the world, also on the channel and everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, whereabouts in the world are you? Let's start easy.
In Germany, in Frankfurt at the
Mm.
moment.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
And okay, so let's start with the basics, okay?
Mhm.
Um, you're in Frankfurt, Germany, and you became a neuroscientist.
Right.
So, what is neuroscience, and how did you get there?
Right. So neuroscience is a really, really broad field, right? So it really goes from essentially modeling the brain, so a lot of, at the moment, deep learning, AI, computational models, all the way to looking at single molecules, right? Looking at transporter, looking at genes and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's very, very broad. Also, it has people from lots of different fields, right? All the way from physics, computer science, to chemistry, to obviously biology, psychology. So it's a nicely sort of, mixed little field. And I'm operating somewhere in the middle, so I'm really interested in how neurons communicate with each other,
Okay.
sort of dynamically, how they kind of, like a little orchestra, how they all kind of work together to form certain patterns and how those patterns inform our experience of the world, basically, and our continuously changing experience of the world also. So that's kind of where I'm at in this whole field.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what got you there? What
Oh
was
yeah. Well, um, that's a really good question. So I would say the starting point, funny enough, is that a lot of my family members are musicians. So first of all, that meant that I didn't want to do music because I felt like there was already enough music around. Um, but it also means that I grew up around this feeling of, oh, things are continuously changing and evolving, right? As music does. And as soon as I started hearing a little bit about the brain in high school, I was, oh, that sounds a lot like that to me, right? And so that was really fascinating to me, this idea of how can you even understand those patterns if they change all the time, and how can you, in this case, use numbers to do that justice, right? I mean, to me, in many ways, science is just another way of trying to express the world as truthfully as possible. Some people do that with music, some people do that with paint, with words, and numbers are another language to do that, right? So, yeah, so that's what it felt like, and also it felt like neuroscience wasn't quite as solved yet as some other disciplines. So there are, way more questions than answers, so many more questions than answers. So you have a nice open field to kind of get creative in.
Oh, I love it. So you found the creativity some way, somehow.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I totally hear you because numbers is what I use for numerology. So I
Right.
they have meaning, they have attributes, and there's patterns to look at and really help to unfold the human experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about, numbers and mathematics is that there's a lot of clarity, right? There's less wriggle room, and that, really like focuses you on what's the best way to express the truth. And I think that's really beautiful.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Mm.
Yes, because one of the foundational mantras in Kundalini Yoga is Satnam, which
Mm.
is about the truth, which is about the truth is there is only one. And
Ah.
I love that concept, like just that evoking that every single time I sit down to practice. And
Mm.
so, and now you're approaching it from the science, component. So I love that. I'm
Mm.
excited to dive in. But before we do, okay, so remind us, what is a neuron?
Okay, so neurons are basically well, you can think of them as the basic building blocks of the brain, right? So each neuron is basically a little cell that usually has lots of different arms that go to other neurons, and they send different types of signals to each other, right? The most typical one that most people talk about are the action potentials or spikes. So they're like tiny, tiny electrical signals, which then open up I don't know, little vesicles. I don't know how to say that in a nice way, but basically they make the neurotransmitters go from one neuron to the next. And neurotransmitters are essentially like, serotonin, for example, is a typical one, glutamate, um, GABA, so that's the one that silences other neurons usually. So there's different transmitter molecules, and they basically tell the next neuron what to do, whether to get more active or less active, whether, to get like active very fast or a little bit more slow and all that kind of stuff. And they build different networks in the brain. So the neurons basically all communicate with each other along lots and lots of different communication pathways that also depend on those transmitters. So that's a little bit like different forms of social media, right? Like some transmitters like glutamate are very, very kind of everywhere between lots of neurons. That's kind of, I guess, like, I don't know, Twitter or whatever, that kind of thing. And then there's others that are much more, local and only between a few neurons, right? So that would be more like a chat, like a group chat or something, right? So that's kind of the different networks that the neurons together then build.
Okay. I
Yeah.
never would have thought to associate it with social media, but I got your analogy. Amazing. So it's
Yeah.
true then that neurons that fire together wire together. And
Hmm.
is that what we're talking about when we say that in childhood we develop patterns of responding to certain stimulation in our environment, and its basis is here in the neurons?
I would say so, right? Obviously, there's always, a lot of work to scientifically say, okay, this particular pattern has to do with this particular way of seeing the world or this particular behavior. But yes, in general, things that you either practice a lot or that you experience a lot strengthen certain pathways in your brain, right? And certain types of reactions thereby. And that's one of the interesting things about, for example, a certain altered state of consciousness, right? Including psychedelic states, also certain breathwork states, right? That you might be getting a chance there to have a bit of a bigger window for rewiring, right?
Okay.
So when we're young, our brain rewires itself quite quickly, right? So that's why, for example, children learn languages really fast, right? Other things, right? Like learn a lot more than we do in general, right? So the brain has an easy time rewiring itself. That obviously gets less over time. Um, but certain practices, I think, and certain states of consciousness help us to reopen that window a little bit, to start being able to rewire ourselves more easily. And I think that's why they're so useful and so important.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that leads me really to the next question is, so what have you come to learn about yoga, meditation, breath work, and the brain?
Hmm. That's a beautiful question, and like that could be a very long answer, basically. Um, what I would say is that I definitely feel like those types of different practices can have quite different mechanisms by which they work, right? So, for example, with meditation, I find so there's a couple of different things that seem to be happening, but one is that when you breathe through the nose, you automatically kind of synchronize your brain, right? So neurons in the brain will start being active in waves, and those waves will become more coordinated, right? For example, in the type of breathwork that I mostly do, so conscious connected breath work, which is very similar to things like holotropic and rebirthing. So I like to kind of put them all together. Um, so this type of breath work has a very different mechanism because you breathe really strongly, typically through the mouth. And what happens there is that it changes your blood pH, and thereby you get a little bit less blood into the thinking cortex. That shuts up a little bit. There might be some other neuronal mechanisms, but what mainly seems to happen, is that communication in the brain gets more flexible. So everyone talks to everyone. So that's a different thing, right? Um, Then with yoga, I'm not a super expert on the neuroscience of yoga. I know there is definitely like work on that, but I don't know enough on that to be like super, super sure. But one of the things that seems to be happening is that basically you're getting better at getting signals from your body and also at influencing them, right? So the communication between body and brain seems to be becoming more kind of efficient, more elegant, right? That's one of the things
Right.
that might be at play there.
Okay.
Um,
So just so let me see if I can put some
yeah,
things that I know is that part of a Kundalini yoga practice for sure is that we're looking for embodiment. In other
right.
words, we're not just up here thinking, 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 and trying to sort everything out up here, but we
Hmm.
actually drop down, figure out what our heart space is doing, figure out sensation in the body, and actually use all of that as communication tools.
Hmm.
Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's some really interesting new science on this. So we also had a little study on this that's just coming out now. And what we did was simply to get free reports of people who had done breathwork in that case, and analyze that with deep learning algorithms. And what you notice is that people mention the body a lot, right? They mention, I felt my breath, or I felt warm or cold, or I cried. There's a lot of things that have to do with physical processes. And I definitely believe that this is one of the big avenues towards healing, right? By now, again, there's also quite a lot of science on the fact that people who can perceive their body better tend to also be generally happier. They tend to, have less anxiety, less depression. They tend to be able to better navigate social situations, right? So just the fact, and this was with very simple measures, right? Because scientists always start with the simple stuff, right? This is just by being able to feel when your heart is beating. So very, very simple. And even that, if you're better with that, right, you seem to also generally have, be better with your well-being in general. And I think that's one of the things we're really missing in the Western lifestyle, right? Is even having spaces where you can even notice your body, right? So absolutely.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I can't even tell you the number of times at my corporate desk where I had to go to the bathroom and I ignored it or didn't even know that I was,
Right.
so kind of bypassing hunger, bypassing tired, bypassing all of that stuff. And if I think even if we're just aware, I have a heart that's beating in this body. It's not just a machine doing my bidding for 80 or 90 years, but it's actually living and it needs to be cared for and attuned to. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's this beautiful, interesting concept. Do you know the concept of email apnea? I find that
No?
fascinating. So,
Okay.
a journalist coined that like a few years ago, but then actually some scientists followed up on it, and it's really a thing. It's when you open your inbox and you hold your breath and you don't even notice. And sometimes people hold their breath for a minute as they're opening their email and they don't realize, right? So that's how disconnected we get at that point from the, anxiety of like, oh, has something happened? Has someone written me a message?
Right, right.
You're forgetting to breathe. That's how strong that disconnect can get, right?
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah,
email apnea.
yeah.
Okay, guilty as charged. Sometimes on a call like
Absolutely.
this, and then I open up my inbox and there's like 20 messages, and okay, which one do I have? Which one is spam?
Yeah,
Which one do I have
that's
to deal
right.
with?
That's right.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I totally relatable, and it intuitively, I think we all see see that truth, but to know that it's actually happening is yet another layer of it. And
Yes.
I think that body awareness is super important.
Hmm.
So let's go in a little bit of a different direction. How can we help our bodies, our brains, and our spirit integrate the changes that yoga, meditation, breathwork offer? I'm thinking now about what is that optimal integration? Because we can do the practice, obviously, we can do the breath work that you do, we can do breath of fire, alternate nostrils, we can do all those things, but then how do we integrate? And is
Mm,
that a thing from a science perspective?
right. Oh, I really love that question. So, I think I would start from a practitioner point of view, right? I think for this, from the perspective of breathwork practice, I think integration is incredibly important. Also because, some of these experiences can be really quite intense, right? You may, you know, actually both ways, right? You may open up really old wounds and realize, oh, there's a lot of pain that I didn't realize. Or the other way around, you may open up, feelings of, wow, I have so much more power than I thought, right? Or there's so much joy, or, I have so much love to give, those kinds of things, right? Actually, both, right, need to be channeled once you've discovered them, right? Um, and for that, I think integration is incredibly important. I can imagine with the Kundalini, for example, too, if energy opens up there, that's a lot of new experience, right? That the other levels of experience also need to kind of, work with. So
Yeah.
I can definitely imagine that too. Um, yeah. So my personal sort of conviction as a practitioner is that first of all, I often tell my clients, and I'd be very curious how you do that actually, to maybe be wary of very fixed interpretations, right? I find that a lot of the time these types of experiences work on different levels, right? So something is happening in your body, maybe in your emotions, maybe on a spiritual level. Some of it you can put in words, some of it you're noticing, some of it not, right? So it's kind of a very multidimensional change that's happening. And if we say, oh, this is what it means, a lot of the time we cut off some of the really important levels. So that would be one thing. I would try to not fix the interpretation too much. A lot of the time, the conscious mind doesn't have access to all the important bits, basically. And then the other thing I would say is that if something happens a lot on one level and doesn't really go to the other levels, I would look into that more, right? Like, for example, I've had some people who go into breathwork and always go into the realm of bliss, right? And come back and then nothing changes in their life. And then I would be, okay, I mean, it's beautiful that that level is, alive, right? How come it's not talking to the other levels, right? So then I would try and work with that communication because I think we're happiest and healthiest when we're whole.
Yes.
And that's that part, but it's also the other parts, the really earthy parts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd be really curious how you do that in your practice also.
Okay. Well, first of all, I love your approach. You're speaking my language. I feel very, I feel very seen. I think that similarly, a lot of the comments that I get on my YouTube channel and people who come into my clients, people who come into Kundalini yoga training, there is exactly that, this idea of integration.
Mhm.
So a few different ways that I approach it is that in the practice itself, for those of you who have been on my channel for a while, what you'll notice is that when we finish a certain segment of our practice, we'll always hold for a few seconds. Just
Mm,
allow that energy to move, allow you time and quiet to notice what's happening, because as we talked about earlier, that embodiment is really key. And I do similarly say the same thing as you. It's not always what you think it is. And in
mm,
fact, if you're thinking about it, then there's that's one trap, is that I have to make sense and meaning out of everything. I have to get all up in my head and figure it out. And actually, isn't there a certain amount of joy in allowing, just allowing the tears to flow, allowing the smile to surface, and not necessarily labeling it? So I totally agree with
mm.
you there.
Yeah.
And I think on the other hand is to um, in Kundalini Yoga, I often suggest a 40-day practice. So that means same breath work, same meditation, same physical practice for an extended amount of time. And our Western brain gets really bored of that. Oh, there's hundreds of things here on your channel. Why should I just focus on one? And the key there is that each time you practice, there's a little more depth, there's a little more insight, there's a little more familiarity, there's a little more that you get exposed to. So those are some of the techniques that I've been using to help people integrate, and then finally to have a really good supportive community. I think that's key too. Like you
Mm,
said, when we travel through those realms that we didn't know about, the joy, the pain, the everything in between, is having a supportive community to talk about it with, a therapist, a partner, a puppy, any of those elements where we can actually articulate or start to put our experiences into words, or at least share a common experience. I think we also go quite a bit further with that too.
I so agree. And I think really there's so I think sometimes, again, coming from the Western mindset, we're so used to thinking, I should be able to handle this on my own, right? But we're like, even evolutionarily, we're really not built that way, right? We're beings of community, right? And of connection. And there's so many experiences that we're not really meant to go through all alone, right? It's okay that you have to do it yourself. Nobody can do it for you, but you're not necessarily supposed to do it alone, right? So I completely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and here's my offer to everybody who's listening, that if that's what you're missing, then Harmony Within is a mentoring program that I use Kundalini Yoga for, to open these spaces so that we can have discussion, and then we can use a meditation to seal in that awareness, that contemplation. And so that link is going to be below. It's Harmony Within, a really powerful way. And I think all of this requires community.
Yeah,
So thank you for
absolutely.
verifying that too.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay, so what does science say about spiritual energy?
Hmm. Um, That's so interesting. Well, not much yet. Uh,
Okay.
It is very silent on that. No. Um, so so here's how I see it, right? So kind of sort of putting on my science hat a little bit, but also my breathwork practitioner hat. So I find that science, when it's done correctly, right, is, trying to look at the world in the most open-minded way possible, trying to find ways to question your own way of looking at things, right? And we've seen that, for example, with meditation, right? That in the 90s, people thought it was a bit crazy to study meditation scientifically, right? People really thought that was, completely esoteric. And then you see things like, the thickness of the brain literally changes through meditation. You could not think of a like more obvious physiological change than the brain thickness changing, right? Plus 100 other things, right? And I feel like with these types of experiences, we're at a similar point where right now we don't have a really good way to look at this scientifically, right? But it doesn't mean that it's disproven. It just means that right now we don't have a good docking point. And I actually think we're coming to a very interesting point in for example, the development of neuroscience, where we can start asking those questions a little bit more. So, because if it's a subjective experience, something is happening, right? We don't know what, and we don't know necessarily if there's energy coming from physically from somewhere else, or if it's like a purely subjective experience, but it's clearly happening. Clearly something is happening. So if something is happening, we can in theory try and understand it better. And so one of the ways that also in my lab we're looking at this type of thing more, not exactly this, but different these types of experiences that look very, very strange kind of at first, right, to a scientist, is, for example, we're looking at body posture over time, right? And facial expressions. And, then you start seeing the subtle experiences of people. For example, also, when when you're in the room with someone else, sometimes you feel really like you're vibing and bonding, and sometimes you're like, oh, I don't understand what this person. All these things are there, right? They're just very subtle, and so they're hard to catch with science. But I think we're in the process of starting to do that. And so in that sense, I think this is actually, I'm really looking forward to, let's say, the next 10 years of where those worlds can talk to each other a little bit more, right?
Mhm.
Same we saw with acupuncture, right? That's basically been shown by science now, right? And I think most things that have been done for a long time by people, right? These are all things that have been done for hundreds and hundreds of years. Very few things are done for hundreds and hundreds of years for no reason, right? Like, people don't do useless stuff all the time. It's just not how people work, right? So, so if it's been done that long, there's clearly something interesting happening. That's how I would see it.
Oh my gosh, yes, 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 yes,
Right? So,
yes, yes. Yes, and that's proof positive. To me, that's proof positive. I don't really need a documented
mm,
data chart
yeah.
to say to help me to feel confident that something that's been time tested for thousands of years,
Mm,
even before documented history, through colonization, through all the economic, social, political upheavals the world has had, here are some practices that are still standing. I mean, to me, that says a lot. Like that persistence, that consistency, that presence of practice speaks volumes to me. I mean, think about our own lives. Like, the qualities and traits that we have today have been time tested through our lifetimes. Okay, this works. This works. It doesn't really work, but I still use it. There's that there's that element too.
It
Okay.
works well enough.
It works well. I love it. I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is probably now the million-dollar question that I get
Mhm.
asked so much. And if you have, peeked at my YouTube channel, you'll see it a lot too, is what is Kundalini rising? What does neuroscience say about it? And
Mm.
what is it? Because we see so many different things. Some people feel very, they have this cathartic moment and incredible amount of clarity, and it changes them forever. And other people have something similar, but it seems very negative and um, detrimental and kind of takes them
Mm.
off the rails for X amount of time. So
Mhm.
for me, the jury is out. There's certain things that sound like Kundalini, and there's other things that don't. And I think for me, it's partly, well, I don't know everybody on the channel personally, so I don't know the backstory, but there's some mental health stuff, there's some nervous system stuff, there
Mhm.
is the practice of Kundalini Yoga, which doesn't necessarily lead to those spontaneous kind of experiences. So yeah, fill us in. What's your take?
Right, right. That's so interesting. And again, like I'd also love to hear more about the different experiences. So there's a couple of different things. So when you're talking about sort of the darker experiences, right? The first association I have is that you also see that sometimes, for example, with psychedelics, and with these types of, like very mystical experience types of states. One of the things that happens is that your sense of self in its normal form dissolves a little bit, right? Right. So, and actually by now you can map that onto some of the brain areas that are most involved in that sense of self, right? The parts
Okay.
that tell you, this is who I am, this is my personal history, this is how I seem to other people, right? Kind of the things that you would normally call the ego, right? There are some little circuits where that kind of information kind of moves around constantly, when you're not doing too many other things. So I think maybe it's also nice to name it. It's the default mode network, right?
Ah,
So exactly,
I
right?
listened to your
So
talk before.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly, right. So
Yes.
so it's always hard to say, oh, this happens in, one or two brain areas. Everyone is involved a little bit, but there's a network that's especially involved in that. And in these types of, let's say, mystical states, what happens a lot is that default mode network, also in meditation, quiets down, right? So the story of who you are is less loud, right? And for many people, that's actually a very good thing. But for some people, for example, people who may have a certain tendency or family history towards, for example, schizophrenia or psychosis, it's kind of the other way around, right? So that sense of self is already quite fragile. And then if you do practices like this, if you're unlucky, it can kind of break apart. And then it starts getting very hard to pick up the pieces of who am I actually, right? So I think there's kind of a middle ground where it's lovely if your sense of self is a bit flexible and can, get stronger or less strong depending on what you need. But for some people, it can be too much. It can really fall apart. So that would be one way I could imagine that sort of the darker experiences happen. Um, and that's also, again, why I think it's so important to work on different levels. For example, one level is on a sort of medical, very grounded, earthy level. Certain people shouldn't necessarily do certain practices. It might just be bad for them, right? Um, so then with the more positive mystical experiences, I would love to see more research on that. If I just listen to it, my feeling is that a lot of it might have to do with the autonomic nervous system, right? So the autonomic nervous system, in case also that not everyone who watches the video is super into this topic, has two big branches, right? So the sympathetic, that's fight or flight, activation, and the parasympathetic, that's rest and digest or sort of general relaxation. And a lot of people think that it can be either one or two, right? Either you're activated or you're relaxed, right? But actually, that's not true, right? They work together. They do complementary things, but they also work together. And one thing that's been shown is, first of all, that your well-being gets much better when these two work together well and when they kind of take over from each other flexibly. But what's also been shown is that moments of awe, right? Moments of awe, moments of mystical experience. And there's actually a beautiful paper on that that only came out a few weeks ago, seem to be moments also when both of them are active at the same time, right? So you're really activated and really relaxed, right?
Yes,
So,
yes, yes,
um, and I feel like that sounds a bit like that those systems really work together. And that's where you get this feeling of, whoa, the energy and the
yes,
clarity is rising, right?
yes.
So if I had, if I got the space and the money to do a study on this, that's where I would start. That's where I would start searching.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we heard your call to action. We need to fund a study that is going to show this. Okay. I I'm so glad I asked that question because this has come up over and over and over again, and I'm really happy to hear it right from a neuroscientist that, there are networks that create either one, a whole series of things that create this kind of experience or this kind of experience. And they're not even this or that. They are part of a continuum.
Yes.
And I can relate to that because right now I'm engaged, I'm excited, I'm my body is like, yes, I want to know more. And I'm also feeling quite relaxed because, the
Right.
conversation is easy, it's smooth, it's helping me to understand more. So I feel very in that I feel enlightened.
Okay.
Okay, I think
Beautiful.
that's
Yeah.
it's so precious to be able to find this kind of knowledge, and you obviously have experience. Sometimes I read papers or I listen to reflections and they're purely scientific or they're purely yogic. And here you get a sense of how the two combine and how people can come to it and understand themselves better. I love that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love the most is to see that, these perspectives of looking at the world, they don't have to go against each other, right? So I think that's a beautiful thing that we're moving into now also. I think, hopefully, that's my hope. As a culture, as a society, that these things don't have to fight each other, actually. They can really enhance each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask the next question. If
Hmm.
somebody has had um, I'm going to use the word upsetting or
Hmm.
let's say upsetting experience of consciousness, what do you recommend?
Mm. Um, yeah, that's a really good question, an important one also, I find. Um, Yeah. So I'll go from the breathwork perspective, right? I'd be really interested because I think, for example, with Kundalini Yoga, I think the experiences are definitely different. So there's probably also different ways of looking at them. Um, so upsetting, I find that in breathwork, upsetting comes in two big flavors. It's either too little or too much, right? So too little is often that people feel like they're running against their defenses or they can't really let go, right? Those kinds of things. Or they're like, I didn't go where I needed to in this session.
Mm.
And then there can be self-judgment, of course, right? Disappointed expectations. And there I find it very interesting to actually look at the thing that you were running against, right? A lot of the time, that's a very interesting part of you, right?
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Right? And
Yes.
so you have actually experienced a lot, just not in the way that you thought you would, right? So I think usually that's with the too little experiences, that's usually, it's not actually too little experience, it's just not the experience you thought you would be having, right? So there, I like to explore with people and maybe go into that also, right? Because for example, meeting your protector mechanisms is incredibly important and actually profound, right? With the too much experiences, so first of all, we try in the sessions already to recognize when people really go into states where they can't find back to their center, right? And really help to contain that, right? And I think, for example, when people do breathwork on their own, that can be a thing that the experience becomes so large that you lose your tether, you lose your anchor. And I think that's generally something that should be avoided. It's not great, right? When things have been, let's say, someone comes to me and things have been very overwhelming. Um, so let's say that for some reason they couldn't contain this in the session. What I would try to do is start building the bridge again. So maybe go back into the kind of experience a little bit, but having all sorts of things in place, like, contact with me, safe words, right? Like having all sorts of things in place before to say, I'm gonna go back in, but I can go back out as well, right? So start to connect that experience back to your center instead of having it be something that you were thrown into, right, and couldn't go back. So then I think this titrating is really helpful, if people are up for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think this is, I think we as a community of yoga teachers, yoga therapists, is we need to move away from uh, the kind of messaging that, first of all, that yoga or meditation or breath work are just fitness or wellness type of things. We're actually
Mm,
dealing with much more than just that one layer. And so that's really important, that it doesn't come across as sport or a hobby or um, a lark, or I'll just do
right.
this, because there's so much more to it that we're unlocking. And I think that's also the detriment of marketing yoga, meditation, breath work as purely wellness or for fitness,
Hmm.
because there is many more levels. And also being really clear about, not every practice is for everybody. It's not.
Hmm.
And depending on our neurochemistry, our past, our sensitivities, all of those things, we have to be just as selective, just like as we would be selective about the food we eat. We then notice, okay, this practice a little bit too much for me right now, but I can do this, or I can try this, but this doesn't work for me. So I really appreciate that. I think it's really, and it comes down to integration. How do I bring this in now to my experience of myself?
Yes. Oh, and I really love that also that you bring this in. I think also as facilitators, it's so important that we are aware of our responsibility, right? For the people that are doing these practices with us, right? That, maybe for some it's quite mild and maybe for some it's a really big experience and that's wonderful, but then we have to be ready to actually support that, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
this is a very big part of Kundalini Yoga training, is
Mm-hmm.
that we know enough about ourselves to step back,
Mm-hmm.
let the light of the teachings come through, and then hold steady to creating a safe, inclusive, diverse environment, so that when people are having experiences, we're there for it, not just curating a nice show and then hitting the door. It's about supporting a community of people who coming because usually there's trauma, usually there's something to sort out. We're not coming into Kundalini Yoga particularly for fitness. It doesn't offer that in the same way. It really offers depth, and that's what I love about it. But yeah, I think you're using the same language as mine, so I really love that. I love it.
Yeah.
I have, as we come to the tail end, I have the fast five. I always ask little questions at the end so we could get to know you better. This is like your pop quiz. Whatever's first comes out of your mouth, that we're keeping it, okay?
Awesome. Okay.
All right. What are you reading right now? What book are you reading right now?
Oh, that's very lucky because I just found a good one. Exhalation by Ted Chiang. It's really
Okay.
fun. It sounds like a breathwork or something book, but it's not. It's actually sci-fi, but really beautiful, deep, philosophical sci-fi. So I'd recommend it.
Okay. It's called Exhale, and who's the author?
Exhalation, Ted Chiang. Um,
Okay. Ready? Next one. Do you have a favorite song or musical artist?
ooh, um, I listen to a lot of different music, so it feels hard
Okay.
to do a favorite. But I was just at a concert last week, so I'm gonna say that Jacob Collier. Very
Okay.
exciting. Very exciting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, you come from a musical background, so there we go. Okay, simple question. Pineapple on your pizza or not?
Oh, I mean, not on purpose, but I'm not actively against it.
Okay.
Like if somebody puts it on, I'll be like, ah, fine. So
Okay. Okay. All right. If you were cooking for us tonight, what would be on the table?
Pasta.
Pasta?
Big
Amazing.
fat pasta, yes.
Okay. What are you doing when you're not neurosciencing or breathing?
Oh, breathing, exactly. So when I'm not neurosciencing, I'm breathing.
Okay.
When I'm also not breathing, I would say dancing. Dancing, yeah. I don't know if
Okay.
ecstatic dance is something that's big in North America. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So like basically hippie disco. Yeah, that I love that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, now we have to be friends, okay? Okay. Last question, and you take your time to answer this.
Mhm,
Where can we find you? Where
mhm.
can we find and explore your work? And yeah, so let's start there. Where do we
All
find?
right. Okay. So our website is intothedeep.info. Into the deep is in the name. We like to dive
Yes.
deep. Um, and at the moment, so obviously we're offering breathwork circles here in Frankfurt for whoever happens to live close. We also offer facilitator trainings. On my YouTube channel, there's mainly breathwork music. So if you need kind of music for your sessions, that's something I love to share also. And there's a couple of things we're going to be doing, starting to do in North America also, mostly in Wisconsin. So if people want to make the journey there, that's also a possibility.
Okay. So we
Yeah.
find you at intothedeep.info.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
And do you have upcoming workshops, something that we can catch you at?
Yeah, so the facilitator training, the next one starts in February, actually. So it's February till June. That's 3 weekends in person and then online sessions in between. And we will be in Wisconsin probably in September. Mhm.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
so excited.
Mm.
I'm delighted to have connected with you. Thank you for answering my email, saying yes, and engaging in dialogue with us. I think it's profoundly important that we bring different voices into the conversation and also to heighten our own awareness of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and all things Kundalini Yoga. I love that.
Thank you so much. I'm really
Yeah.
happy we made this connection. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you,
Mm.
Martha. And we know that we're going to drop all the notes for and the links for Martha's work below. And if you found this conversation helpful, of course, you can like and subscribe and do all the things. Drop a comment below. What stirred you up? What got you thinking? What took you in a new direction? We'd love to hear that. And of course, I'll be sharing this video with Martha, so she'll also see the comments and questions. And maybe, just maybe, she'll do a follow-up with us.
Yay.
Yeah.
Love to.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.